This week, CNN carried a live town hall event with Donald Trump, the frontrunner for the GOP nomination for the 2024 election. So far from my reading, it seems that everybody, friend and foe alike, is agreed that Trump had a barnstorming night. It was probably the best day of his election campaign so far, by a very long way indeed. Indeed, it brought home to a number of people that Donald J. Trump could well be the next president of the United States, in spite of all the fact-checking, the court cases, all the partisan manoeuvring designed to prevent that exact outcome. I would add that it's still the less likely outcome, but then it was the less likely outcome in 2016. So, what happened? On one level, everybody got what they wanted, except for the opposing candidates for the Republican nomination and their supporters. That includes some of the people complaining the most loudly after the event. That's just the way of politics in the modern era. CNN ran an event that was conceived as a Republican town hall. Given that Trump is seeking to persuade Republicans to make him the candidate, that seemed to be appropriate. To that end, they engineered having a largely Republican audience, one that gave Trump a standing ovation at the beginning and at the end, that laughed at his jokes and celebrated whenever he landed a solid punch on his hosts. Now, were staunch Republicans CNN's actual target audience for the event? Either the answer's no, or that it was, but CNN so completely fails to understand that audience that they misdirected their focus. Personally, I'm going with the first option. CNN serves Democrat audiences, and they know this very well. It might be a conservative town hall, but it was served up as a spectacle for the left, and I'm sure they were hoping and expecting the people in the middle ground as well. Which is the only way you could explain why you would spend the vast majority of the event pushing Trump on questions that the left cares deeply about, but centre-ground voters might have at least some resonance with, but the Republicans don't generally care about, or at least have accepted Trump's positions. A Republican town hall run for actual Republicans would no doubt have touched on abortion and gun ownership questions that were indeed eventually touched upon, but there would have been a lot more on the economy, on what Trump would do to tackle problems of crime and inflation. How would he solve a problem that persists at the border in spite of the high focus that he had on building the wall the last time around? How would he protect American jobs from things like the rise of artificial intelligence, amongst a number of similar things? And of course, how would America really reverse its decline in the face of an emerging and increasingly assertive China? Those are all questions that would focus on not just who his values and conservative credentials or otherwise, but what would he actually do about them should he become president again. That wasn't the focus at all. Instead, CNN host Caitlin Collins focused on the questions that Democrats have been banging on about and driving home for the last 4 years. Would Trump now accept that he actually lost the 2020 election? And it was always obvious where that one was going to go. What did Trump now have to say about the 6th of January events? It was a great day, apparently. The same as he's been saying ever since. And wasn't he now proven a terrible misogynist, having just lost this civil case alleging that he sexually assaulted a woman? No, he says that was just the usual fake litigation being used to stop him from standing for the presidency. It was political suppression in action. The focus on the left's favourite talking points gave Trump the event that he most wanted. Indeed, his team couldn't have written the script better themselves. He could be combative, rude, funny, irreverent, swatting aside his interviewer regularly, all the while being cheered on by his home audience. And Conservatives, regardless whether they think he's the wisest candidate or not for the next election, were all delighted at the spectacle. A Republican candidate quick-wittedly fighting back against the left's attacks, not apologising, not giving an inch, just thumping them hard and shamelessly so. Now, you might therefore say that the whole thing had backfired enormously on CNN. All that wailing and gnashing of teeth to be heard on the part of Democrat activists was an indicator of how traumatic and deeply difficult they found this event. Well, maybe, but CNN is a business. The town hall attracted 3.3 million viewers, making it the most watched cable TV show in that slot by far, 4 times bigger an audience than its standard one at that time. And that audience included more than 780,000 people in the highly desirable advertising demographic of 25 to 45-year-olds. The executives of CNN may well be praying that Trump doesn't become president again because of their personal convictions and politics, but they surely hope that he will become the candidate because their ratings have never been anywhere near as good since he left the first time around. Don't imagine this will be the last time Trump will be on CNN, although they may try to do it slightly differently next time to at least make some attempt to reassure their target audience that they've heard their complaints this time around. But most of those Democrats are nowhere near as upset as they purport to be anyway. They also want Trump to be the nominee, because many of them assume that it will be the guaranteed way, possibly the only way, to get Joe Biden re-elected. He beat him before, therefore he can do it again. Because while Trump's CNN antics delighted his base, boosting the chances of his candidacy, they reasoned that seeing him banging on and on about how the 2020 election was stolen from him and spending all his time on that backward-looking personal grievance agenda, that won't play with the middle ground voters, who after all already voted against him and his favoured candidates in recent elections. In other words, if people voted for him in 2016, but then switched and voted against him in 2020, there's nothing in that endless replay of personal grievances accompanied by the sideshow of various legal actions that are going on that's going to make them think, you know what, I think I'll swap back to that guy in 2024. And they may well be right. But partisan activists often fail to map the landscape accurately due to their own ideological blind spots. First time around, Biden was allowed by COVID and by an extremely partisan mainstream media to mostly stay in his basement. Let Trump draw all the attention without asking too many questions of this rather old-looking man who was already showing some signs of cognitive issues. Now, 3 years later, Biden's flaws have become very well known. The vast majority of Americans agree that he is now too old and they prefer that he shouldn't stand again. Now, Trump is not that much younger, of course, in age, but one of the things this town hall demonstrated very visibly is that there is a significant gap between them in terms of quick-wittedness, presence and campaign performance. Age really only becomes an issue when you think you see visible signs that the candidate may no longer be up to the job. Now, of course, arguably, neither man is up to the job on various factors. Both of them are capable of speaking complete nonsense sometimes. One of them is doing so, however, with dominant flair, and the other just seems to kind of lose his way a lot in the middle of sentences. It is untested how that plays out in an actual election where neither side gets to sit in their basement. Current polling suggests it still wouldn't be enough to hand Trump the presidency, but then polling had Hillary Clinton as the next president. But then there's the other wild card, the likelihood that America goes into recession over the coming year. Recessions tend to be the thing that gives birth to one-term presidencies. Ford, Carter, indeed Trump himself, because of the impact of COVID in 2020. If America is deep in recession, by the time it gets to the election proper, Trump will be able to point to his record before COVID hit. Remember, Biden's numbers on COVID were not better than Trump's in the event, so that's removed as a weapon. And he can point out how great the economy was under him up until that point. And at that point, it then becomes too tough to call, especially since the country being in recession might well be the thing that encourages Trump to actually talk about that rather than banging on about what happened or didn't happen 4 years ago. It is, of course, still not a foregone conclusion that he gets the candidacy. There is still plenty of time that has to pass. Time where he could easily sabotage himself, because you never quite know when he's going to do that. Or maybe some rabbits get pulled out of hats by his actual political opponents, assuming that some of them are competent. There are a number of conservative commentators making the case that, yes, of course, Trump can win the nomination by being the one who speaks to the heart of the Republican base. But it would be preferable, they say, if that base, while enjoying the sight of him beating up on CNN, nevertheless thought about who would then actually subsequently go on to win the election. Right now, it looks like they're the ones with an uphill battle. But the arguments might begin to stick. You never know. So what else came out of his town hall? Was there actually any policy content of substance? There was some ludicrous stuff where you could cut through to infer the substance underpinning it. So, for example, Trump claimed that if he became president again, the Ukraine war would be over within 24 hours. Just a ridiculous promise, of course, but knowing Trump's relationships with the people involved can lead you to infer that the only way he could expect to deliver something like that would be to insist that Ukraine settles the losing part of its territory to Putin, on the threat of the withdrawal of the support of the United States, which would leave Ukraine much more at the mercy of Putin's troops, if they've been successful, of course, in preserving the stalemate up until the election. Trump might well see that as the way to force a settlement. Now, it would be a horrible settlement. Forcing it would alienate the US from pretty much all of its European allies and would have knock-on consequences that would reverberate for a generation. But so long as those consequences remain speculative, Trump can just point at the amount of money that's currently being spent and argue that, well, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could save all of that money? And many conservatives will say, well, yes, it would. Trump was asked about abortion. He took credit for the shake-up with Roe versus Wade, whilst arguing the country had to find a way for people to get along on the issue, which is a general statement of basic truth, I guess. Generally, the policy statements were not what made the news. Of course, this was only the day after people were asking whether he could really stand after a civil court had found that he'd sexually harassed a woman. Surely, people were saying, this should be a disqualifying factor for a would-be president. And in general, you'd have to agree. But very few people are seeing it that way because this case was not as simple as that makes it seem. The allegations, after all, refer to events almost 3 decades ago that went public only after he'd become president and was gearing up for a re-election campaign. The lawsuit was funded by Trump's political opponents. The jury was drawn from Manhattan, where he is deeply politically unpopular, and that most of the Democrats using the case to denounce him, everybody knows, will turn on a dime to support, for example, President Bill Clinton, who was plausibly accused of equally, if not more, troubling offences. The American people know all that, which is why the argument that this is just the latest chapter in an ongoing political witch hunt does rather ring true to them. Democrats don't quite know whether the things they do are designed to boost Trump because they want him to be the candidate that they can beat, or to bring him down because they don't dare let him be the candidate who might actually turn around to beat them. The result is a series of actions that seem designed to fail, but may just be the result of political panic and incompetence. Either way, you have to think if you stood a competent candidate on either side in 2024, they would almost certainly win. Yet that seems to be the one thing the political classes we currently have seem to find impossible to arrange. That being the case, yes, Donald Trump has an evens chance of being the next president of the United States, in spite of the fact that it would be an outcome that the majority of American voters believe would have negative consequences. Except, of course, for CNN's ratings. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please share with anyone else you think would also enjoy it. Word of mouth is really important to us. And if you've not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? As the saying goes, that subscribe button won't smash itself.